Hi, everyone. Welcome to my kitchen. This is my 10th annual Boy Time Really Flies Valentine's Day live event for essential vegan desserts at Rouxbe. And I'm just delighted to be here with you. Thank you for taking time out of what I know are your busy days. And one of the really cool things about Rouxbe and the students that I work with is that we're everywhere. So I'm in Eastern time, I'm in Philadelphia, and you are kind of scattered. I'd love to know where you are. I will say that today, for the first time in at least 10 days, our temperatures are above freezing. We have had absolutely bitter cold in Philadelphia. I mean, when I wake up, I hear that it's 4 Fahrenheit. It's hard to walk around the city because there's ice, there are piles of snow. And so I've been thinking cozy foods, warm oatmeal for breakfast, which is something that I enjoy on the regular anyway, tea, hot chocolate, because chocolate is good. So we're going to talk about some Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving, listen to me. I know this is Valentine's Day. The weather had me thinking otherwise. This is the Valentine's Day event. Before I get started talking to you about my ideas and then answering your questions, I just want to remind everyone that there is a place for you to add a question if you haven't already done so. And I may ask you a follow-up question. Everyone here is welcome to write to me at fran@rouxbe.com if you have further questions. I want to appreciate my essential vegan desserts students in particular. Those of you who are new or graduates or in process, remember that you can always write to support@rouxbe.com if you have a question of a technical nature. You can write to me at fran@rouxbe.com, of course, as all of you can. And do join our Facebook group for Essential Vegan Desserts. It's a nice place to interact with your cohorts. So before I ask Patrick to show some photos, I'm going to hold back on that a little bit. My thinking about this year's Valentine's Day, given the weather that I'm experiencing, and I know that that is the case for much of the country, and people are concerned about a number of things, including the cost of food and time. I'm thinking about Valentine's Day as a special time for a special dessert. However, think comfort, think easy, think budget. Of course, dairy and egg free, because this is my wheelhouse, is vegan and has been for 35 years. Real food ingredients. We don't need any odd ingredients to make the wonderful desserts that we make in Essential Vegan Desserts. And think about dietary preferences. Some people are allergic to nuts. Some people avoid soy. I certainly don't, but there are people who do for valid reasons, of course. And because I really believe in love and compassion. I do believe that the love that you put into the food, in other words, be present with your food, and it will make a difference. I am assuming that you're here today because you either are plant-based or curious, and I want to remind everyone that desserts are the perfect gateway to get people, your friends, your family, your neighbors, to become more interested in plant-based foods, because people have birthdays, people have anniversaries, people have holidays where they sit around a table and share a meal together, and certainly Valentine's Day. So we want to provide really wonderful examples of our vegan desserts. And I say that they are There is no guilt. You know, if you're familiar with me, if you've been following me or reading what I have to say, you know that I never say guilt free, because I don't think guilt has anything to do with, should have anything to do with food. You know, you want the cookie, eat the cookie. And think about balance. But better for you desserts definitely, definitely can be. So before you get started thinking about your Valentine dessert, and that means whether you are a couple or a larger group, a family or a family of friends, or a singleton, then think about how much time do you have that you want to devote to making your dessert this year? How much space do you have in your refrigerator or freezer or oven? And for example, I'm a big fan of making baked Alaska, and it's a make ahead dessert. It's a wonderful dessert, can be done in stages, the cake, the ice cream, and the aquafaba meringue, and can go into your freezer. But that's not going to work if you don't have if you don't have room in your freezer. Since I renovated my kitchen and I have a new refrigerator, I am just delighted. So I'm going to ask Patrick now to show a series of photographs. I asked permission of this student, Maria Allen is her name. She's a recent graduate, and this is the work that she did for her capstone event, which is a dessert party with mini desserts, individual desserts. And I thought these desserts were exceptional. And I also thought they could work for Valentine's Day desserts. So they really are beautiful. There were mendiants on cookies. You saw parfaits, or we could call them verrine, with a verrine would be, let's see, something like in a little glass like this, or even I save my jars, even like this, and that would be really lovely. And then, of course, she did have baked Alaskas, miniature or individual, depending on what you think. And on some of the desserts, Maria told me, because part of the grading assignment is that you do a detailed description of your work, she molded white chocolates, specifically Valrhona. And in one case, they were in hearts, and another in a flower. And I thought that was really a beautiful, beautiful thing to do. Now, white chocolate is something that has been to date really the holy grail of vegan, because while white chocolate is at its essence cocoa butter, which is the fat in chocolate, not dairy, it's the fat in the cocoa bean, it generally contains milk powder, even the quality ones. So having a choice now of some good white chocolates, particularly this Valrhona, is a wonderful thing. And chocolate, you know, there are people who like white chocolate. There are people who think that chocolate needs to be brown. That's up to you. White chocolate is pretty spectacularly sweet. I will say that the Valrhona white, which is quite delicious, does contain nuts. So that might mean that it won't work for you. Now, I want to start answering some questions. Donna M. is asking, is there an easy way to temper chocolate? That's a great question, and that is one that I hear all the time. We have a lesson in Essential Vegan Desserts on tempering chocolate. So what that really means is when you get, let's say you have a bar of chocolate. When you open the bar of chocolate, unless it has been damaged, it is in temper. It's shiny and it snaps. As soon as the chocolate is heated, though, the molecules, it's very technical, go there every which way, and the chocolate might dull when you're dipping something, or might be softer than you wish. So there are several ways to temper chocolate. My preferred way, and I think it is the easiest way, is what's called the seeding method. So you melt 70% of your chocolate slowly and properly over some barely simmering water in a bain-marie, which you can make by sitting a heat-proof bowl over, but not in, the water and chocolate, except in one dessert that we make in Essential Vegan Desserts, do not mix. When the chocolate is melted almost 100%, you add in the other 30% of the chocolate, which has been chopped finely or in chunks. Some people prefer the finely chopped chocolate. I prefer chunks, but not really huge chunks. And you stir that in, and your chocolate should be tempered that way. And you test it by putting a little bit on a knife or on a piece of paper, and then you put it on the counter, and it should set in about 5, 6, 7 minutes. If it hasn't tempered, you can melt it and start again. So Donna, that's really the way. There is a product called cocoa butter silk, which is tempered cocoa butter. And it is said that if you use a particular percentage of this cocoa butter silk in your chocolate as it melts, it makes the chocolate temper very easily. I have purchased some. I haven't used it yet, so I can't speak to that. Jeffrey S. Hi, Jeffrey. So Jeffrey says, no question, can't wait to see this. Well, Jeffrey, that's very nice of you. Thank you. I'm glad that you're here. Hi, Betty. Betty N's birthday is Valentine's Day. Well, happy almost birthday, Betty. And I will say that I have a cousin whose birthday is Valentine's Day, and my late husband's birthday was Valentine's Day as well. So it's a very special birthday. That's wonderful. Betty writes, I just ordered your vegan chocolate book, Unapologetically Luscious and Decadent Dairy-Free Desserts. Any suggestions on good quality brand of chocolate? Yes, Betty. There are many good brands of chocolate now. Some you can find even in the supermarket and some online. Valrhona makes a good chocolate, a good dark chocolate as well. What I prefer is to check a list, and I put it in the chat so you can see it. The Food Empowerment Project has a chocolate list because there are many fine chocolates today. I want to make sure that my chocolate is made slavery free. And so I check that list. The best thing for you to do is to do some tasting. You'll have to do a little homework. My desserts are generally made with 70 to 72% chocolates. They don't all taste the same by any means. It has to do with how the chocolate was roasted, how the chocolate was prepared, grown. There's a lot that goes into it. I used to think that all 70% chocolates would taste the same. They do not at all. So do some tasting and give it a try and let me know what chocolates you end up liking. Catherine has a question to explain the difference between types of cocoa to bake with, Dutch process, etc. That's another really good question, and it does make a difference. So again, these are techniques. These are foundational. This is foundational information that anyone who wants to bake delicious and reliable desserts needs to know. I have seen too many recipes that say, for example, half a cup of flour, half a cup of cocoa powder. What kind of cocoa powder? There are two main types of cocoa powder. One is natural or non-alkalized. The other is alkalized cocoa powder, often seen as Dutch cocoa powder or European style. And within the Dutch cocoa powder, you will see black cocoa, which I do not recommend for anything, maybe more than a tablespoon for color. It's just highly, highly alkalized. So if the recipe does not tell you which kind of cocoa powder to use, look at the leavening in the recipe. If the recipe contains baking powder or mostly baking powder, maybe a little bit of baking soda, but it's baking powder reliant, that is your clue to use Dutch process. If the recipe calls for mostly baking soda or all baking soda, that's your clue to use natural cocoa powder. It will absolutely make a difference in the way that a batter-based dessert bakes or tastes. And by that, I mean a cake or a muffin. If you're making hot cocoa, you can use the one that you like the best. So I hope that answered your question, Catherine. And hi, Maria. And Elvis from Illinois. Hi, Elva. Hilda lives on the Sunshine Coast of BC. And I'm going to try to pronounce this. It's Sechelt. Well, welcome. I'm so glad that you're here. Lai has a question about tofu, not about desserts, but I actually am quite a good savory cook and I love tofu. Lai is asking, can tofu be combined in meatballs to be baked or fried? I don't know what else you have in your meatballs, whether they're plant-based or animal, but tofu could certainly be used as a binder and to increase the protein. Absolutely. Carmen says, hi, chef. Hi, Carmen. I learned about date paste in one of the lessons from the Rouxbe Professional Cook course. I'm curious to know whether the paste can substitute sugar when baking cakes or creams. Carmen, that's another terrific question. I have date paste in my freezer at all times. It doesn't freeze solid, so I can scoop out what I need. And for those of you who may not know, date paste is made by soaking whole dates, pitted, of course, in some hot water and then blending them up, and you get, in the same way you would get any fruit paste. And date paste is used very often in raw desserts and in many of our desserts. So I don't substitute it for sugar in baking cakes. Sugar is a granulated substance, and within the granulated sweeteners that are used to make vegan desserts, you're going to find differences. Date paste is between a liquid and a solid, and I don't find that it works in baking cakes, but in doing creams, absolutely, I use it. Here's an example. This is some of our cashew vanilla pastry cream that is made with vanilla and some sweetener. I have used, instead of sugar, I have used date paste in here and dates. And of course, it is quite delicious, Hilda is saying, happy Valentine's month. Yes, I think so. How long should one safely keep confectioner's icing in the fridge? I always make more than I need. By confectioner's icing, Hilda, I am going to assume that you mean vegan butter and confectioner's sugar or American buttercream. If I'm wrong, then let me know in the chat. But that holds for a really long time, and I have frozen mine as well and then let it defrost and re-whip it. Diane has a question about almond flour, which I love. Can almond flour be made by simply grinding almonds very fine? Yes, you can do that. in a food processor, you want to be careful because you can go from fine almond flour to almond butter, which is delicious, but not your intention at all. So be careful about that. If I'm going to be using the almond flour in combination in a dessert where there is some sugar, sometimes I'll put some of the sugar in as well. But I have used this morning, there are two different kinds of almond flour that I use. One is called fine, which is made from blanched almonds, which means that the dark skin of the almonds has been taken off. And I use that. And that tends to be, there's different terminology for this. Today I made, let me show you. I had some bananas on my counter and I didn't want to put them in the freezer. And I made these wonderful banana muffins today. And I was thinking, do we really, this is what I wrote on my Instagram story, does the world really need another banana muffin, vegan banana muffin? But I made some changes to a recipe of mine from years ago and I absolutely loved it. And I used whole almond flour. Whereas when we make our drop biscuits in the course, or when I make marzipan, I use the blanched almond flour, 1 cup of unground almonds to 1 cup of ground, not necessarily. Get a scale and you'll have to measure. I believe that you'll need more than a cup, but check it out. Robin is asking, what brand of chocolate do you prefer to use in your chocolate ganache for the chocolate cake to live for? I really do bounce around. I've been using a chocolate for several years that's called Belle Collade, and it is a Belgian chocolate from a company that I have worked with. The company is called Puratos. That is available commercially or Worldwide Chocolate or one of the chocolate companies online. But there are many, many good ones. So for me, the taste matters because if you think about it, what is ganache but a percentage of chocolate, a percentage of a plant milk, maybe some flavor, maybe a little bit of salt, and a drop of oil to keep it shiny. So the chocolate is really going to come through. And speaking of ganache, here is some that I made and took out of my freezer. And, a ganache, depending on the percentage of chocolate, the percentage of liquid, can be stiff enough to make the center of a truffle or to glaze a cake. So there are many, but what I do prefer to use is a chocolate that is between either 70, 71, 72, 73%. Diane says, per Catherine's question, any preferences using cacao or cocoa? Well, I'm glad that you're asking me that because cacao is really unroasted cocoa. So it falls into the category of natural cocoa. It is used often to describe raw cocoa, raw cacao, but there is no such thing. And I know some of you have heard me say this over and over again. And I have talked to manufacturers of raw cacao, and they have said it's true. During the fermentation process, the beans are laid out and the temperature naturally goes to higher than what is allowed in cacao. So if you're thinking about using chocolate that's labeled cacao, know that that is non-alkalized or natural cocoa, and then the rules that I explained will hold. I do prefer to use a cocoa powder, whether natural or alkalized, that is between 20 and 22% fat. There are lower fat cocoa powders, but I want a really nice, rich taste. And so those are the ones that I prefer to use. So Diane, don't mix them up. Cacao is natural cocoa powder. Denise says, congratulations on your 10th Valentine's Spectacular. We wish you the best. That's so nice of you, Denise. Thank you. I've been with Rouxbe. Maybe that means I've been with Rouxbe for 10 or 11 years, and I couldn't be happier. What a wonderful, amazing group of colleagues I have. They're smart, they're lovely, and the people that I get to meet through my course are just wonderful. All right, Brenda's, we're really focusing on cocoa powder today. So Brenda, and I think that's great because that is very important. Can you please go over when to use Dutch cocoa powder or non? When a recipe for a cake or something that you're baking uses when the leavening is either all baking powder or mostly baking powder, use Dutch process. When the recipe contains as the leavener baking soda, predominantly use natural or non-Dutch. It's really called non-alkalized cocoa powder. Now you will see in many vegan cakes, my chocolate cake to live for example, baking powder and baking soda. And that's because we are replacing the eggs really with chemical leavening. When I say that, I always stop because chemical doesn't sound good, but these are leaveners that we need today. I use non-alkalized baking powder, and I like to use Bob's Red Mill baking soda, but there are many. I use the non-aluminum, that's what I meant to say, non-aluminum baking powder. So I hope that helps, Brenda. Hi, Shar. Well, here is my dear friend and Rouxbe colleague, Chef Shar Nolan, who I adore. Shar and I met in New York well before I moved to Philadelphia. And she, as soon as I moved here, she gave me a tour of Philadelphia. Hi, Shar. So, and Shar has, let's see, chocolate cake question. Using your oil-free chocolate cake. Made upside down strawberry cake, no flavor from the berries. Better to use citrus and make a syrup with OJ and maple syrup. Yeah, the berries are not going to give much of a flavor. I would macerate the berries with a little bit of maple syrup and maybe put them on top of the cake. But especially this time of the year, citrus, blood orange or anything like that would be absolutely delicious. So the cake that Shar is referring to, my chocolate cake to live for, was my breakthrough cake. All those years ago when I left the traditional baking kitchen and decided that it was time to create some modern vegan recipes that would work. And the very first cake that had my tasters jumping around was this particular chocolate cake, which they dubbed the chocolate cake to live for. So there is the original version, and then I have a gluten-free version in my cookbook as well. But I was lucky enough to be invited by Rip Esselstyn to make his wedding cakes. And so if you're familiar with the Esselstyns, that is SOS, no salt, oil, or sugar. Well, I did have to use some sweetener in the cake, but I did a no oil version. And it was a prototype. It was just so much fun and it was delicious. So it's different. It's a little denser, a little fudgier, but it's really good still. So that looks like that's all the questions we have. I can wish you all a very happy Valentine's Day. Thank you for being with me. I will be back here in March. And if you wish to be in touch with me, again, feel free to send an email to me at fran@rouxbe.com. at rouxbe.com. Thank you, everyone. Bye.